As the war in the Middle East enters its fifth week, the fuel crisis is biting harder. The Prime Minister has stepped up his response, using the government's financial firepower to secure more supply, while urging Australians to work from home where possible. The opposition's answer, a fuel excise cut. But the big question remains, does Donald Trump have a strategy to end this war? Our guest today, Andrew Hastie, says no. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Fuel supplies in Australia are technically higher now than before the war, but prices keep climbing and distribution remains a challenge. Hundreds of petrol stations are dry, families are rethinking holiday plans, farmers are struggling. The Prime Minister has shifted gear with daily briefings and announcements. Yesterday, the government moved to underwrite new fuel shipments. Tomorrow, National Cabinet will work on reducing demand, encouraging more work from home and public transport use. And a cut in fuel excise, now being pushed by the opposition, is under consideration. The Albanese government is facing a defining test, a fuel shock threatening the economy and an awkward diplomatic dance with the US president lashing out at allies.
Spectacular. Beautiful morning.
Red sky in the morning, elbows warning.
I think this balloon might have just crashed into Parliament House.
Across the country, hundreds of service stations are running dry.
My question is to the Minister for Energy.
When was the government advised that 6 shipments of vital fuel supply bound for Australia
Were cancelled, and how many ships have been cancelled to date?
Every expected delivery of fuel has arrived.
As the government has made clear on multiple occasions. It's not like the Chief Executive rings up and says, hey, we just had 6 cancelled.
I refer the honourable member to my previous answer.
Plan is better than panic, and panic is where we're going.
What is the government's plan to secure fertiliser?
No fertiliser, no fuel will mean no food for Australians.
We are going to start running out of food.
The member opposite shouldn't be panicking people when it comes to food supply.
More people working from home who are able to do so, that makes sense.
How does a abattoir worker work from home? What are we going to do? Take the carcasses back to their living room and say, go bone it out?
For the next few weeks, Australia's supply of petrol and diesel and oil will be the same, if not higher, than it normally would be.
We don't need rationing if that is right. Now, the problem with this Energy Minister is transparency is not his forte.
You can have rationing in the cities.
Juvenile statements from the opposition about ruling out rationing and just show they're not serious people.
There is the same amount of fuel coming as we've previously had. Barnaby, honestly, be a grown-up for a change.
I think there's gouging here.
More than half of Australians are cutting back on their fuel use.
The steps that individuals can take now if they wish. There's also voluntary measures that government can encourage. We're not there yet.
The anxiety levels are as high as I've seen, maybe with some even higher than COVID.
We are seeing Mad Max levels throughout this country.
You don't feel like the wrong one?
Yeah. That would be a good look, wouldn't it?
I have called on the government to slash the fuel excise, to halve the fuel excise for Australians.
Well, the damage is pretty significant.
We've put sanctions on import of Russian oil. Why are we still doing that? We need to drive our cars.
On Monday, I will again convene the National Cabinet.
Okay, another National Cabinet.
Monday's National Cabinet should include making public transport free.
New fuel security powers will enable the government to underwrite the purchase of fuel by the private sector.
I don't think that everyone expected the Iranians to have us by the balls as they do in the Strait of Hormuz.
The end of the war in the Middle East can't come soon enough.
Well, our panel this morning, Niki, Savva, author and columnist with the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, the political editor of the Australian Financial Review, Phil Coorey, and Greg Sheridan, foreign editor of the Australian newspaper. Good to have you all with us this morning. Niki, the Prime Minister does appear to have shifted gears over recent days, the daily appearances, the announcement yesterday to help importers be able to secure more supply of fuel to Australia. It is a big test for the Prime Minister that we're going through at the moment. How do you think he's going so far?
Well, so far, I do think that they're doing okay, about as well as can be expected under very difficult circumstances. They've made their priority supply and doing everything that they can to try and make sure that there is adequate supply, including the announcement yesterday about underwriting shipments for private buyers. So I think they are working very hard on that. But I think at the moment, because people are so worried, and they have a right to be worried, given that nobody really has any idea how long this will go, nor how bad it will get, except that it will get very bad, that the government will have to move soon to the question of preservation. In case the worst happens, which it probably will, what the plans are to preserve and conserve whatever fuel we have. Now, there are other issues too, like meeting shortages, and I do believe that the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry today is going to suggest that they cut the heavy vehicle user charge to guarantee internal supply lines.
Just explain to people what that is.
That's a 32.4% charge on diesel for heavy vehicles,
right,
over 4.5 tonnes. And because they're so critical to supplying supermarkets, that might help mitigate price increases.
Okay.
So they have to step up.
So the opposition, Phil, is saying cut the fuel excise and the road user charge. The government's still thinking about that. I understand that the feeling is it might be needed as a political gesture, but there is an argument that cutting fuel excise is actually only going to make the demand problem worse.
Yeah, so at the moment you pay about 52 cents a litre, pardon me, Dave, so you're talking a 26 cent per litre cut. So this is what Scott Morrison did when Russia invaded Ukraine. They cut it for 6 months. The difference then to now is there was no sort of concerns about supply. You know, the price had gone up, but the Straits of Hormuz weren't closed, for example. So in this case, we're possibly looking at, you know, a finite supply maybe, or something they're approaching. So if you increase demand by making it cheaper, do you run down your supplies quicker? The coalition modelled that. They said, I think, would roughly take 1 day off our reserves, go from 38 days to 37 if you did take the excise off.
Hard to model though when we haven't really been in a situation like this.
Panic, right? So exactly, but that's their their view. It is really expensive. I mean, one of the troubles we've got here, David, is this country is in very poor shape to deal with an economic shock. We've got big deficits and high inflation before this started. You know, we saw it at the start during the week. The latest inflation number for last month came out at 3.7%. That's before you add on what this is going to do to things. And similarly, we've got these massive deficits. So there's no fat there in the budget to sort of help with this crisis. And if you give away money in excise, they may have to, but
it puts more pressure on the budget.
Yeah.
Greg, we'll come to whether there are any prospects of an end to this war anytime soon. But just on how we're dealing with the fuel crisis right now, how does Australia compare to other countries that are facing similar pressures?
Well, we're floundering, David. I think the government is floundering, and the whole nation is floundering. We are, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, fat, dumb and lazy as a nation. Phil wrote a terrific piece the other day showing how the lack of preparedness on oil reserves was a bipartisan problem. And I agree with that. But Albanese's been in office for 4 years. It's his problem now. They've done nothing to increase fuel reserves. So Japan has 200 days of fuel reserves.
200
China
days.
has a year. And even New Zealand has bigger fuel reserves than we have. We are at the end of long, complex supply chains. We're completely, even though we're very rich in natural resources, our politics means we can't develop any of them. So we're at the end of very long supply chains. We've got a multiplicity of choke points. The Taiwan Strait, the Malacca Straits. I mean, there are so many ways we could be in a mess. And look, we're having a kind of national breakdown now, and we've actually got more fuel than we had before. What will we be like if we have a real fuel shortage and we're not prepared in any way?
And just on tomorrow's meeting of the National Cabinet, the state and territory leaders are going to meet this afternoon about 4 o'clock, I understand, a hookup ahead of that National Cabinet tomorrow. There seems to be a common view that they don't want to mandate work from home rules. People still have the scars and anxieties of COVID. They don't want to be telling people you have to work from home, but encourage white collar workers to do so where they can. And then, Phil, make sure that if we do get to the point where you have to limit how much fuel you can buy each day, they're doing it together, not all running in different directions.
Well, hopefully, yeah. I mean, the word coming out of the federal government is light touch. That'll be the sort of the nature of the measures they'll recommend tomorrow. They don't want to sort of go straight to mandating or rationing and provoke what they think would be unnecessary panic. But the thing with the states, Dave, I mean, we've heard this before. I mean, the reason we have National Cabinet is because Scott Morrison invented National Cabinet when COVID broke out, because the states had all the power and the sovereignty over all the important things, and it was an effort to try and get them in the same room and at least get a modicum of consistency to approach. This won't be as complicated as COVID. We're not sort of locking down people for health reasons and stuff like that, but it could be just as destructive economically if things...
If this goes bad, this will be COVID without masks.
Yeah, pretty much. So, you know, I heard the Prime Minister the other day saying, I'm pledging we won't have a rerun of COVID, and everyone going off like Brown's cows like they did last time. But, you know, state parochialism won out last time, and if it becomes a sort of Hunger Games.
They will have to start mandating. I mean, if it reaches the point where supplies get to that level and you want to ensure that essential services are maintained and also food transport maintained, there will have to be mandated measures put in to restrict.
But they need to be consistent.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we will look at
water communities.
We will look at how long this is likely to go on for, whether there is any sign of an end to this. First, though, let's talk to the Shadow Minister for Industry and Sovereign Capability, Andrew Hastie. First, the US might be our most important ally, but the Iran war is testing the friendship. Donald Trump has taken aim at both Australia and the British Prime Minister over a lack of involvement.
I think he did something that was shocking. He didn't want to help us. And maybe in particular that country, you know, the longest bond, the longest ally. Australia too. Australia was not great. I was a little surprised by Australia. I wouldn't say anybody was great other than the 5 countries in the Middle East.
Andrew Hastie, welcome to the program.
Good morning, David.
So when you hear our most important ally downplaying our willingness to help, how does that make you feel?
Well, it gives me a visceral reaction, because I think about what we've done over the last 100 years with the United States. First World War, Second World War, 500 dead in Vietnam. We were there in Iraq and Afghanistan. So we've been a good ally. But whatever you think about Donald Trump's rhetoric, the world has changed. And if you look at the National Defence Strategy put out by the Department of War last year, they refer to the rules-based order as a cloud castle abstraction. So it's not just Iran, China and Russia who are testing this world order. Donald Trump and his team have said it's dead. So we need to take that seriously. And I think what this war has done is emphasised the need for us to be self-reliant as a nation.
I'll come to that, but on this war, can you see an exit strategy here?
Well, the strategic rationale for the war has changed. We've gone from regime change, nuclear weapons, and then degrading Iran's missile, drone and naval capacity. Last year I supported Operation Midnight Hammer because the IAEA put out a statement that Iran had 400 kilos of enriched uranium at 60%, which is just a short step from getting to weapons-grade uranium. And I thought that was a legitimate reason last year. We never got any battle damage assessment after those strikes on Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan, so we don't know what the Iranians have. The point now is, though, that the US went to war without consulting allies, and a lot of American allies are dependent upon the exportation of hydrocarbons out of the Middle East. And so we're experiencing the economic pain now, particularly in this country.
You just said you supported that Midnight Hammer mission last year. Do you support this war?
Well, I don't know why we went in now. I thought last year we did the job. So you can take issue with Donald Trump's rhetoric. It's all priced in, mean tweets and whatever else. But there wasn't consultation with allies, because had we had a bit more lead time, we wouldn't be in the current crisis we are now, where we're trying to secure our liquid fuel.
So you can't support this war, is what you're saying?
Well, no. If I have to choose between the United States and Israel and Iran, I'm going to choose democracies rather than a murderous regime which has, ambitions to build a nuclear weapon and potentially use it against Israel and the US and allies. So don't get me wrong here. But wounds from a friend can be trusted while an enemy multiplies kisses. As a close friend of the United States, I think that we can be honest and we can ask hard questions.
So being honest and asking the hard questions, again, do you see an exit strategy, or do you fear, with ground troops now being sent to the region by the US, we could be heading into another forever war?
Well, I don't know about a forever war, but a ground operation certainly has huge risks. But the Battle of Hormuz now is going to take some time to resolve. The best case scenario is late April, but this could drag on for some time. There isn't an international coalition like in 87, 88 when the Strait needed to be reopened. Even the Soviets were involved with that one. There isn't an international coalition of ships ready to open the Strait. And so as a country that's dependent upon imports of oil from the Middle East via Asia, we're really in a difficult place right now.
Are you worried that US credibility is being damaged?
I am worried about that, yes, absolutely.
And are you worried that Australians' support for the US alliance is also being weakened by all of this?
I think so, and I think the economic pain is going to be more acute, and they're going to question the judgment of the president as this drags on. So,
and what about you, though? I mean, if you're questioning the judgment of the president, does this shift your own view of the alliance?
No, I'm pro-America, and I have been for a long time. I'm married to an American. My grandfather was saved by a US medic in World War II. I've served on combat operations with Americans. But like I said, we can be critical of bad strategic decisions, and I think
and this is a bad.
I think this was a huge miscalculation. Iran has managed to pretty much hold the whole world economy to ransom, and because we're at the end of a very long supply chain, we're going to experience pain. Now, we were already in a bad position before this war broke out. High interest rates, sticky inflation, and now we've got bond yields headed upwards, equity markets are down, consumer confidence is low, we've got deficits, we're heading towards $1 trillion worth of debt. We don't have the fat for a twin energy shock in oil and gas, which is what's going to happen to our country.
Let's talk about that. So the latest move from the government is to underwrite shipments to help secure supply, shore up supply. Legislation, emergency legislation, will be introduced by the government in Parliament tomorrow. Will you support it?
Look, I think we need to be doing whatever we can to make sure that we have sufficient supply in this country.
Does this make sense?
So on principle, this makes sense. We'll look at the bill. These are big and extraordinary powers, but we are in extraordinary times, and we'll just make sure that it's fit for purpose and the right checks and balances are in place.
And on the call to cut fuel excise, to halve fuel excise, wouldn't making fuel cheaper just add to the demand problem?
Well, I think we're on the edge of a recession here, and if we don't get fuel to the bowser and make it affordable for families, for tradies, for the economy that depends on fuel, we could slide into a recession here. So we've got to do supply work, which the government's doing, and we also need to do demand work as well. And that's why cutting fuel excise and the heavy vehicle road user charge makes sense. It's temporary and targeted. $3 million, it's offset on the budget. We're going to use money from the EV discount, the electric vehicle discount, the green subsidies, the subsidies for green hydrogen and tax production credits, and also the home battery scheme. So this is offset. This isn't additional inflationary spending.
But if petrol and diesel are cheaper, right, and there's a fear that we're going to run out of it, people are going to buy more. They're going to fill up more jerry cans, aren't they?
Well, this is where the government's failing. This is a human nature management problem. We're seeing hoarding and informal rationing throughout the supply chain.
How do you stop that?
And well, the government has to take a more of a leadership and coordination role with the states. And
how do you stop people hoarding?
Well, where there's bumps in the supply chains, the government must smooth those out.
And but where there is supply, people are filling up jerry cans. Is the hoarding? How are you saying that should be stopped?
Well, I think all Australians need a message from the Prime Minister to just keep calm, carry on.
That's what he's saying. He's saying do the right thing, don't buy more than you need.
He's got to be getting up every single day. The panellists just before alluded to COVID. Well, we're entering that sort of space now.
So limit purchases each day?
Well, no, I'm not saying we should do any of those. The government hasn't been transparent, so I can't see the modelling. I can't see where the distribution blockages are. They see that. We've been using question time over the last few weeks to draw out as much information as we can. This is what I mean about leading. Being transparent, speaking daily to the nation, making sure that where there are bumps in the supply chain, they're smoothed out.
I guess the bigger question is, how does Australia become more resilient to global energy shocks like this? This is part of your role when it comes to sovereign capability. What should we do to protect ourselves from moments like this?
I've long held the view that deindustrialisation over the last 40 years was a big mistake. It was a bipartisan project, and we're now down to 2 refineries. The last time we were caught in this...
Whose fault was that, though?
Well, it's as a country, it's everyone's fault. You know, we bet long on the post-Cold War rules-based order. The US would remain on the same trajectory for 50 to 100 years.
Should the former government have done more to keep those refineries?
Well, we kept those last 2 refineries going. Angus Taylor, as Energy Minister, partnered with the Australian Workers' Union to keep those
What about all the
going.
ones that closed?
Well, I mean, again, 2 of those closures were announced under Labor. I mean, we can talk about the past, but we've got to talk about the future. Sure. I'm future-focused, and I think we need to do exploration in this country. We need to drill in this country for unconventional oil, shale, gas, and we should also talk about using coal. We have an abundance of coal. We could do coal to liquid in this country. We could have coal to liquid refineries that produce diesel and aviation gas, and that could prevent us from being vulnerable in a war or a crisis, because it doesn't matter how you diversify your supply chains. In the end, if you don't have feedstock and refining capacity in this country, you're going to be vulnerable to geopolitical events.
So this coal liquefaction idea, it is used in China and South Africa, I think.
That's right.
Do you have any idea how expensive it would be?
Look, I imagine it would be just as expensive as any major projects around the country.
Any idea, though?
I couldn't give you a figure.
It's got to stack up, though, doesn't it?
It's got to stack up, but I think, if the private sector are going to lead on this, they need a sense that they have the backing of our political leaders. They need, regulatory certainty, and they need support. And I think there is a growing support out there in the Australian people for fuel security.
It's highly polluting, though, too, isn't it? This coal liquefaction.
I think sure. There's always trade-offs with these things. I'll tell you what's going to be more difficult, though, is if we run dry and we have to go to rationing and, the economy tanks.
Why isn't the shift to more electric vehicles part of your answer to this problem? Wouldn't that give us greater protection from an oil shock?
Well, I have no problem with electrification. It's a good thing, and it diversifies our supply chain. But in the end, over the medium term, we're still going to need plenty of diesel for trucks, and we're going to need aviation, gas. A lot of our economy is a just-in-time diesel economy.
But motorists are voting with their feet. Electric vehicle sales, since this war began, are taking off.
Sure.
You accept that this is a way people see, Australians see, that they can protect themselves from the oil price.
Well, and that's because of the fringe benefit tax exemption for electric vehicles.
Which you want to get rid of.
Well, I mean, let's be honest here. 75% or so of EVs are imported from China. It actually acts as a subsidy for Chinese manufacturing. And in fact, we're on track by 28, 29, I think it is, to subsidise overseas car manufacturers more than we ever did Holden and Ford in this country. One thing we're not talking about, though, which goes to your point about electrification, is the gas market. We're talking about the oil market, but we're not talking about the gas market. And gas here sets often the wholesale electricity price in this country. So with gas shortage now across the world, we can expect our electricity prices to also rocket through the roof.
But it's less and less setting the price as more people get home batteries. We're not seeing what happened with Ukraine, are we?
Well, I mean, the national energy market uses a marginal pricing system, and gas is still often the marginal generator of power.
Not as much as it was.
Well, it still very much is. It might only produce 5 to 10% of energy needs.
Sure, but it's going to set the price.
But it sets the price, which means...
But do you accept home batteries, though, help address that problem?
Well, which means if our domestic gas price is fixed to the export price of LNG, we can expect electricity prices to go through the roof. My whole point here is that we're about to head into a perfect economic storm, and the test for the Prime Minister and the Treasurer come May is how they keep this country from sliding into a recession.
But look, on batteries, more than 2,500 households in your own seat have taken up the cheaper home battery subsidy from the government to get a battery installed at home. It is most popular, this scheme, in seats like yours in the outer metro areas. Why would you want to end that?
Well, I think there's integrity around the battery scheme. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, you know, I think we're going to have a closer look at the home battery scheme.
What's the integrity problem?
Well, you know, we'll explore that. You know, there's questions about how the money is being distributed, and the point I want to make, though, is
someone rorting this? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no. I think, look, the three areas that I've highlighted: the electric vehicle discount, the subsidies for green hydrogen and production tax credits, and the home battery scheme. You know, this is all good and well if you can afford these things, but we want to focus on looking after Australians now who are getting hit at the bowser, and that's.
But you're the one raising this gas problem that it's pushing up our electricity prices. Homes in your own electorate are deciding, I'm going to put a battery in. That's going to shield my family, make us more self-sufficient, aren't they?
Well, but you know, gas in this country is both a fuel and a feedstock, and this is the broader problem. You know, gas as a fuel powers our alumina and our aluminium industry.
But what have you got against the batteries, the home batteries?
Cementing kilns, bricks and tiles, plastics.
Yeah.
It's also a feedstock for urea and ammonia and plastic precursors. So if the price of gas goes up, there's a lot of complementary inputs across the economy. They're going to get more expensive for Australians. And you know, batteries can't fill the gap.
But should people put a battery in or not?
Well, it's up to them. But you know, we want to get bang for buck, and right now we've got successive deficits in this country. And we just think that we can use our money more sensibly and more prudently, given the situation that we're in.
I want to ask you more broadly, your role as the Shadow Minister for Sovereign Capability. What is your vision? Obviously, we can't be, self-sufficient in every industry. What are the priorities for you?
Look, I think first thing is getting out of net zero. I think the government's energy policy and industry policy is decarbonisation, and they're two sides of the same net zero coin. What that's doing is making us less productive, less cost competitive as a country. And so if we're going to retain sovereign capability, like refining, if we're going to retain our smelters and our alumina refineries, we need to be cost competitive. And there are trade-offs with the Labor government's ideological push towards net zero, and that means that a lot of our heavy industry goes offshore. The costs of the net zero transition are also passed on to households and small businesses as well. So, number one, get out of net zero, get power prices down. Number two, rebuild and advance manufacturing capability. You can't do defence industry policy, for example, if you don't have a strong industrial base. And that's what I think we need to recover as a nation.
So can you just clear up, do you support what the government's done to keep things like the Whyalla Steelworks, the Mount Isa copper smelter, and just the other day, the Boyne Island aluminium smelter going in Australia?
They're treating the symptoms of a problem they've caused.
Do you support what they're doing?
Well, I want to keep those industries going, but long term, we can't keep bailing out assets that aren't cost competitive. And the underlying problem, of course, is Labor's net zero.
So isn't it also the concentration of these markets like copper and aluminium by the Chinese? Surely this is what the companies themselves are saying is the problem.
Well, sure, China is playing very aggressively in the industry policy space, subsidising protection, and so it's very hard for countries like Australia to compete. But one thing we do have is an abundance of coal, gas, uranium. We've also got a lot of solar capacity as well, wind and sun, but you can't build an economy off solar, wind and batteries alone. And if you look at the Asia-Pacific region, and Dr. Fatih Birol, if he'd consulted his own website where it breaks down energy uses in the Asia-Pacific in 2023, coal was on an upward curve. Renewables is about 7.5% of the overall energy mix in the Asia-Pacific region.
So to reindustrialise some of these sectors that you're talking about, and defence as well, comes at a cost. Is this one of the reasons why you're more open than some of your colleagues to things like a windfall profits tax on gas exports?
Well, on that, I'm open-minded because the Liberal Party is not the first line of defence for corporate Australia. I think multinationals and big business in this country have lost their social licence. They've made no effort to recover it. And a lot of Australians feel like the system is rigged against them. They don't feel like aspiration matters anymore. They don't see reward for their effort. A lot of them have lost hope completely of ever owning their own home. I think as a dad of 3 kids, aged 10, 8 and 4, do my wife and I need to start planning for them to get into a home rather than my own retirement. And a lot of families, I think, are thinking the same across this country. So I'm open-minded because we got...
Sounds like you're more than open-minded. Do you think the gas exports should be taxed more?
Well, I think we got smashed in 2022. We got smashed in 2025. Our primary vote is being cannibalised from both the right and the left. So I think adopting a posture of humility and being open-minded is important, not being reactive. So I think the bigger geopolitical frame here and a macroeconomic frame here is that we're about to potentially slide into a recession. One of the things we've got going for us is our abundance of gas. Is introducing a new tax right at this time going to help our situation? Before February 28, this conversation looked very different. We're in a different period now.
Okay, but just on your answer there, and you referenced housing and your worries about your kids ever being able to buy a house, is this why you're also open to negative gearing, capital gains tax changes?
I just think we've got to... This is a new era. You know, the world order has collapsed in the last couple of years. You know, we're experiencing a lot of economic pain. Inflation's very sticky. I've mentioned all the factors that people feel and live every day.
Shouldn't be ruled out, these tax changes.
I just think we need to overhaul the whole system. So we either fix the system or it's torn down by people like Pauline Hanson.
So those colleagues of yours who say it's a tax on housing if you're going to do these things, are you saying to them...
Well, no one's going to reward us for a final last stand for neoliberal politics, okay? There's no medal for that. I actually want to win and deliver centre-right government for this country, and the best way to beat Labor is to start listening to people and meeting them, you know, meeting their concerns head-on rather than, you know, reactively slapping them down.
Just on the fight that the Liberal Party is facing against One Nation in particular, you've made the point that One Nation is out to tear down the Liberal Party. Should the Liberal Party be doing preference deals with One Nation?
Look, I think John Howard's right on this. I think it should be a case-by-case, seat-by-seat basis. My working assumption now is that One Nation wants to supplant us as the major party on the centre-right. They are doing everything they can to destroy our credibility. And having said that, though, a lot of people who've parked their vote with One Nation now have very legitimate concerns around energy, around immigration, around housing, around a rigged system, a rigged economic system, and we need to be responsive and respectful to those people. But let's not pretend that One Nation are out to form a coalition or work with us. They're not.
If it's a case-by-case question, preferences, Peter Costello famously took a tough stand and said, not going to preference One Nation in my seat. Andrew Hastie, what about your seat? Would you preference One Nation?
Look, again, I'm going to come back to seat-by-seat, case-by-case basis. And the candidate who ran against me last year, a guy by the name of Fernando Bove, lovely family man, he became my friend. He's someone who, former DLP candidate, good guy. So, you know, case-by-case.
So what's the answer? Well, would you preference One Nation?
It's complex, you see, because, you know,
is it?
At the moment in South Australia, they've won a couple of seats in the lower house. But our vote on the centre-right was cannibalised. And I just want to... Look, I'll cut to the chase. I want to build a very strong platform and vision for this country that people want to vote for.
But cut to the chase.
Not chase votes to the right.
Not chase votes to the right. Does that mean not preferencing them?
Well, it's a case-by-case, seat-by-seat basis.
Yep.
I just think
you're not sure.
You can't be hard and fast about these things.
Okay.
You know?
Well, look, just finally, Andrew Hastie, you are this morning making a more forceful argument in pushing back against Donald Trump, a more open-minded approach on tax reform, and you know, on the preference deals, you're open-minded as well. You do seem to be speaking out more on some of these issues than some of your colleagues, and indeed Angus Taylor. Who is really leading the Liberal Party thinking right now?
Angus Taylor is leading the party, and I'm very glad to be in my current position of Shadow Minister for Industry and Sovereign Capability. It's a role I really enjoy. I care about this country. I want to build a stronger economy. I want to be more self-reliant. And yes, I'm more than happy to speak my mind, particularly on issues like the war in Iran. You know, on one side, you've got Pauline Hanson boosting Donald Trump for the war in Iran. You know, I've got a brother in the Navy. The question is, could I put my hand on heart as a parliamentarian and send him and his shipmates into the Strait of Hormuz And I can't because I know we don't have the capability to defend against Iranian drones and missiles. Now, the government should have remediated that. That's on the Albanese government. But Nor, like Pauline Hanson, should be quick to commit Australians to a war that I think is going to be much more complex than otherwise suggested.
Andrew Hastie, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, coming up, has Australia been dudded with the new EU trade deal? The PM says it's a win-win. We'll put that to the test. First, let's get back to our panel, and we're joined once more by Niki Savva from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, the Australian's foreign editor Greg Sheridan, and Phil Coorey, the political editor of the Australian Financial Review. Niki, a bit to explore from that conversation, just on preferences there, case-by-case basis, but in that final answer, Andrew Hastie made it clear that he takes a very different view to Pauline Hanson on the war, that she's standing with Trump, he's standing for Australia, essentially. What did you make of that?
Well, as usual, I thought it was a very interesting and a very thoughtful exposition by Andrew Hastie at every point, on the war, on Hanson, on tax. On the war, I thought, you know, he obviously has very grave fears about where it might go, and he also seems very definite that we should not get any further involved than we already are. So I thought that was very interesting. On Pauline Hanson, he has distanced himself and the Liberal Party, or tried to, further away from her than anybody else in the party has tried to do. And I think that has been missing in the debate from the Liberal Party, and I think good on him for doing that. And on preferences, the line up to now has been that they see no issue in preferencing One Nation ahead of Labor. Well, as he was sort of pointing out there, One Nation is cannibalising the Liberal Party. It's destroying the Liberal Party. And the way to help stop that is not by preferencing them in every situation.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, very thoughtful.
Very interesting on a range of points, as you say.
Against, you know, a very reckless and a very bloodthirsty war run by a very reckless and a very bloodthirsty President and Secretary of War.
He's so interesting, Andrew Hastie, Phil, on so many fronts, including on, you know, this openness on negative gearing and capital gains tax and so on. But pushing how to take on One Nation is really interesting to hear from him, that willingness to point out, I think more forcefully, where he disagrees with Pauline Hanson.
Yeah.
The Libs, by the way, in South Australia have just avoided the humiliation of losing opposition status to One Nation. They won just enough seats to hold on to that title. But Andrew Hastie's position is a more aggressive one when it comes to One Nation.
First of all, that interview is why I don't count that bloke out as a leader, and possibly at the next election. I mean,
a change of leadership.
Oh, you know, if it doesn't work, then you know that they could do worse than go there. But. Yeah, look,
how do you think he contrasts to Angus Taylor?
He's just very honest in his views. He's prepared to break with the orthodoxy that's clearly not working. I mean, if you go back to the war, and he was very strong. He did a radio interview on Thursday on 2GB. And the theme running in Parliament that day was all Anthony Albanese's fault. They read out a lady called Anna from Sydney's western suburbs who'd rang into the radio station saying the petrol's through the roof, I can't get my kids to work. You know, then they raised this phone call in the Parliament. Hastie, that lady rang into the 2GB interview. Hastie was on. He said, "No, it's Trump's fault. This is Trump's war. You know, he caused it. He went in there half-assed without any idea how to get out of it. No exit ramp, no strategic objective, that sort of thing." And then he made the point. If you go back to the federal election, for example, Peter Dutton suffered by association with Trump, and Hastie is trying to now do this with One Nation and Trump. And he said, there's Pauline, you know, in with Trump, boots and all. You know, think twice before you vote for her, because her mate Trump is why you're suffering
what
at the
about
moment.
That? Yeah.
And he's happy to make those points. And good on him. We're not hearing that from Angus Taylor, where like Matt Canavan, the National leader, has been out since the South Australian election running lines against One Nation, but you know he'll take them on and he'll make a case for it. It's a refreshing clarity.
And on the war, Greg, Andrew Hastie just said it was a huge miscalculation by Donald Trump. He clearly has grave concerns about any, the strategy behind this and any exit strategy as well. Is he right to have those concerns?
Well, he is. I agree with Niki and Phil. It was a very impressive interview, and Hastie, that's the leadership profile the Liberals should have. Very strong on energy, aggressive, taking the fight to the government on energy. They've abandoned net zero, now they've got to be willing to argue for it. The opposition has a long history of sidling up to a courageous position, taking it and then running and hiding. Hastie and Canavan will argue the position. On Trump, I think his tone is absolutely right. On One Nation, I think, generally speaking, the Liberals should preference One Nation ahead of Labor, except where One Nation is running a criminal or a lunatic as its candidate, because in the end, for the Liberal voter, they'd rather have a One Nation MP than a Greens MP. On the war, I think Hastie is right, but I would just say this. There's a very substantial case in principle for taking action against Iran, a very substantial case. It was still pursuing a nuclear program, the only object of which could be weapons. It was still the chief state sponsor of terrorism around the world. It had used its proxies to attack Israel in the most murderous, bloodthirsty fashion possible. It had attacked Australia. It had killed 30 or 40,000 of its own citizens. So the moral case for doing something about Iran was substantial. However, it's clear that Trump has either not had or certainly not communicated a clear strategic objective. He hasn't taken obvious preparations. He didn't even fill up the US oil reserve. He didn't bolster the Gulf Arab nations' counter-drone defences. He was using expensive missiles to hit drones, not getting into the counter-drone capability. The other point that Hastie is right about is this argument about sending the Australian Navy to help in the Strait of Hormuz is a kind of typical Australian fantasy argument. We don't have a ship that could go to this. Our poor old Anzacs, the old age pensioners, they need the RACV every time they go out to sea, you know. We've got 3 air warfare destroyers. 1 is in an upgrade program. That means we've got 2. Those are the only ships you could possibly send. 1 of them is in the water at any one time. That means if we sent that ship, we'd be sending the entire Australian capable surface fleet. So it's a kind of a fantasy argument.
We're in this situation, though, now over the past week where Donald Trump is talking about we're negotiating with Iran. Iran says, no, we're not. What are you talking about? What's going on here? And these deadlines that he's set that then he pushes back, he's done that twice. This is where the US credibility question comes in.
Well,
what's going on?
How can you possibly believe anything he says? Because he says something different every single day. He said very early on that we've won the war. Well, if that was the case, why did they not stop then? You know, he gets out there and he abuses his allies, people who are supposed to be his friends, and then he expects them to line up and support him in a venture that he did not consult them about. He had no objectives clearly outlined from the beginning, no exit strategy that he's enunciated at all. So really, nobody has a clue about what he's doing, why he's doing it, and when or how he is going to end it.
I mean, in fairness, the US and Israel have achieved a lot of their military goals when it comes to diminishing their missile capability, nuclear capability, their army, their navy, and taking out the leadership.
Trump told us a year ago that he had obliterated Iran's nuclear capability.
Sure, but it's very.
So how do we know that
it's very clear though that any move to obtaining a nuclear weapon is now a lot harder for Iran. Their missile stocks have been depleted, but it seems very clear as well, Phil, that Trump did not envisage this Strait of Hormuz problem dragging on like this.
Well, I don't think he'd heard of the Strait of Hormuz before it happened.
Perhaps.
Nor did he envisage the attacks on the Gulf states. And then we've seen overnight now the Houthis are getting involved. Israel's filling its boots in Lebanon. There's certain buttons you don't push in the Middle East unless you know what you're doing. And Trump's done this, right? He just slapped the whole keyboard, and it's just gone crackers over there. And this is the problem.
So how does this end? What are the possibilities?
You've got to make Trump feel like a winner. Now, a couple of weeks ago, Anthony Albanese very unsubtly sort of said, time to get out of there, you've done what you came to do. He made the point, he said, well, your stated objectives were to degrade their military capability and and their nuclear capacity. And by your own words, you've done that. So why are you still there? Now, it was a fairly strong push to the president.
Yep. Call it quits, get out.
Yeah. Claim a victory and get out. Now, Trump can claim anything he likes. He always does. He can manufacture a victory, and if out of defeat, his market crowd will probably back him in. And that's what all the leaders in the West, or probably beyond the West, are fervently hoping he will do. Before this become, Donald Rumsfeld used to use that word quagmire for the Iraq War. I mean, he led them into a quagmire then, and this is if we get ground troops involved in stuff like that here, that's where it's headed.
Drags it out. What's the most likely ending to this?
Well, there are a couple of developments, David, that are very worrying. The Houthis have just got involved. That's a very big change. That's a quite fundamental change, because they can bugger up shipping in the Red Sea and they can attack Saudi oil facilities directly. The Americans and Israelis haven't suppressed Iranian missile and drone firing capabilities. Now, one of Trump's enormous strengths is his absolute shameless brazenness. So he could just say, mission accomplished, I've stopped firing, aren't I great, give me a Nobel Peace Prize. But it's quite possible that the Gulf would be in a worse situation even then than it was before, because Iran now will be established as having control of the Strait of Hormuz. It will probably charge a tariff to get through the Strait of Hormuz. The Gulf states will feel overexposed towards Iran. The other thing, technically, I don't know that anyone can clear the Strait of Hormuz. It was done in the late 80s, but a lot of ships were hit even then. And in that time, the lethality of asymmetric warfare has increased. It's much easier now to hit passing ships with cheap drones as well as missiles and mines.
Modern warfare.
So it's not at all clear to me that if you had every allied ship in the world in the Strait of Hormuz, you could still guarantee
That's a worrying.
safety.
It's a worrying.
So
It raises the point that a negotiated outcome
would be
seems to
best, but
underway.
the Iranians have no incentive to give Trump any kind of victory. They want to continue to establish deterrence. You've got an oil crisis, a gas crisis, a fertiliser crisis. I think there's every chance that this goes on in one form or another for quite a long time.
Just before we leave this issue, what about the share trading that took place in the 15 minutes before Donald Trump posted that he was extending his deadline with Iran? I think there was a big spike in trading on oil futures. Someone basically bet $500 million US on oil futures, paid off very handsomely. What's going on here? The suggestion is that
Gee, I wonder if there could be a bit of insider trading there, a bit of corruption.
It happened with tariffs too, remember?
Happened on Liberation Day with the tariffs.
Well, it is very ugly the way so many of Trump's relatives, for example, are in Bitcoin business, and so many of the Gulf states have invested in their business. Now, when Bill Clinton did this kind of thing, I wrote columns saying how outrageous it was, and it's outrageous when Trump does it as well.
Final topic for all the focus on sovereign capability. It does seem that free trade isn't being completely abandoned. Australia and the EU have finalised a long-negotiated free trade deal, and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen addressed the Australian Parliament. And while not mentioning Donald Trump by name, she did make it clear the EU is working around this protectionist American president.
Today, we are telling an important story to a world that is deeply changing. A world where great powers are using tariffs as a leverage and supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. In our story, open, rules-based trade delivers positive sum outcomes. Trust matters more than transactions.
Phil, beef and lamb exporters aren't happy. Wine growers are. Is this a good deal or a bad deal?
Look, on balance, yes. I mean, look, agriculture always comes off. Well, they never get as much as everyone else in these deals, because when you're doing deals with other countries, agricultural industries around the world tend to be heavily protected. And they're usually the sticking point in these deals, David. I remember when Tony Abbott came in, one of the smart things he did is he kicked the National Party out of the trade portfolio and put in Andrew Robb. He was the first Liberal trade minister since Blackjack McEwen. The Nats had had it since Blackjack.
He did a bunch of
and they fast-tracked these deals with China,
South
Korea and Japan, because the sticking points were agriculture, and the Nationals can't sort of be seen as selling out their constituency. This is the first major bilateral trade deal I can think of that the Labor Party has landed. They did one with the UAE, but this is quite significant. And so there's been this sort of protest from the Nationals and so forth that we haven't seen when they've actually done the deals, even though agriculture they came off better than they'd been, they just didn't get as much as they wanted. Like if you talk about this beef thing, I think at the moment they were able to sell 4,000 tonnes to Europe with tariffs on it. When Don Farrell walked away from the negotiations a couple of years ago, they had them up to about 27 or 30,000. They've got it to 35 in this deal. So it's not what they wanted, it just wasn't as good as they hoped for. There's a lot of politics in that reaction the other day, but...
And I think clearly both sides here are keen to show that free trade is not a dirty word, that there are still some countries that want to be able to trade, even if it's not completely free trade, to be clear. Look, just finally on the diabolically difficult task of putting a budget together and all of this, Niki, when, you know, who knows what the global economy and our economy is going to look like in a couple of months from now. Does this make it more or less likely that Jim Chalmers is going to be able to do all the reforms that he wants to do in this one?
Well, I would have thought less likely because everything is so uncertain, because we don't know how long this will go on for, and even if it was to end tomorrow, there's still going to be a very long period of uncertainty and volatility. So, yeah, I think there are some things that he should do in the budget, particularly on tax reform, but...
Bit of support from Andrew Hastie maybe for some of that.
Yeah, well, there's one vote. You know, I don't think it was going to be, or it is going to be now, a big bang budget like it might have been before. I mean, they do modelling every day and it changes every day. They could think that inflation is going to be 5% today, it could be 6 tomorrow and 7, and then unemployment will go up. So it is, I can't remember when there was a more difficult time to frame a budget.
Yes. COVID was pretty bad.
Yeah, COVID was bad, but...
We had a $100 billion deficit, I think.
We did, because they just threw money at everything.
Spend it all, spend it all. Yeah, I don't know. Phil, you wrote about this over the weekend as well. Things like getting rid of the tax breaks for electric vehicles, that seems to have gone now.
Well, they're reconsidering how hard they were going to go. I don't think they've landed, but this is the fringe benefits tax exemption you get when you take out a novated lease on an EV. I think you can sort of argue it both ways, Dave, because... You know, do you need a tax incentive now? I think there's a fairly obvious price signal out there now called petrol. And anecdotally, we hear from the motoring groups that people are hoovering up, you know, whatever EVs are out there, especially the hitherto stagnant second-hand market. But the government doesn't. They think the view, from what we gleaned from the Prime Minister's press conference and conversations I had with certain people afterwards, was now's not the time to, you know, pull up the drawbridge on those tax exemptions. I think they still might tweak it. They might bring down either the income, put an income test on it, or the value of the vehicle that can be leased. But from what I hear, they're not going to go anywhere.
All right. One of the big problems is that we misuse the word reform. Almost everybody who talks about reform in the budget is talking about higher taxes. I mean, I think it is barking mad, the idea that you'd put more tax on gas at a time when you desperately need gas. We need a revolution in this country with people exploring everywhere for gas. We've got loads of gas under the ground, which we haven't been allowed to explore for. As Phil said, before we went into this crisis, we had record levels of government spending except for COVID, huge budget deficits, high inflation. So when times were good, we couldn't keep our house in order in terms of, you know, balancing our budget. Now times are not so good. The chance that we're going to respond sensibly to it is very slim.
All right. Well, I don't know. I bet that there won't be a windfall tax on gas.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that.
All right. Well, I'll have a bit more to say about that in a tick. Greg Sheridan, Phil Coorey, Niki Savva back in a moment with some final observations. Time now, though, for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with host of Tonight at the Museum, Alex Lee. And when is it on, Alex?
It is on Wednesdays, 8 p.m.
Lovely Matt Golding has got Chris Bowen here. Hasn't he got the best head?
Yes, such a distinctive profile, just from a few lines.
The cartoonists tell me he's just a dream to draw.
Oh, right. You never want to know what a cartoonist thinks of you, do you?
I know, really.
Yeah.
No, I'd hate to think what they said about me. The Prime Minister here and Chris Bowen go, and other countries will decide what fuels come to this country and the circumstances in which they come. There's really no circumstance that Howardism can't be applied to.
That's right, yeah. He was just doing us all a favour with that one.
Peter Brollman has pretty much summed it up. Have you filled up lately?
Yes, yeah. We have a hybrid car, so I'm being just a little bit more smug than some others about it all. But yeah.
You're semi-smart. The good news is there's petrol. The bad news is we'll have to sell our car to be able to afford it. It's almost like you need to take out a mortgage extension.
Right. Yeah, trade in the car to get some petrol.
Yeah. The couple here not looking very, very pleased with it. Beautiful Chris Downs cartoon. It's got the Middle Eastern bandit here, and they've tied Trump up, which is a lovely metaphor. Talks with Iran are going so great. Don't you love it? He says, we're talking to Iran, and Iran's going, no.
Yeah, it's just fan fiction from the US president.
Kathy Wilcox, I think, has just channeled the wartime Great Britain here perfectly. Keep calm and carry a jerry can.
I think we're going to start seeing car stickers of this.
Alex, the state of politics in Australia has got a lot of people seeing red, and in South Australia last week they saw orange as one Hanson sort of surged in the polls.
One Hanson, I think she should just bite the bullet and call it that.
Brett Lethbridge has siphon of the Times.
She's siphoning off the primary votes there from the Libs.
Yeah.
I love the expression on Jane Hume's face, like gulp.
Gulp. What are we going to do? I thought this Matt Golding was just delicious.
So fun.
Isn't it? The thought of Barnaby following along behind Pauline with the coconut shells going clop, 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 clop.
It'll be hard actually not to imagine that whenever I see them out together now. Yeah.
It could have been worse.
It is but a scratch.
Pauline came into the Senate and she sort of took a little victory lap, a little bow. She bowed to everyone. And
not because of her passion for the European Commission?
No. Then Barnaby just sort of appeared magic-like in the chamber, and he got this big cheer.
Oh, really? I wonder if he was outside just waiting to hear his voice.
Here I am. Angus Taylor does pull some fairly extraordinary faces at times.
Yeah, you know, like in cartoons when you're really hungry and then they start hallucinating that their friend is a chicken? That's what I'm imagining is happening in this photo.
Another powerful friend from the European Union came and addressed Parliament, Ursula von der Leyen.
It's beautiful with the reflection on the mirrored floor. I mean, how do you get a shot like that?
You lie on the floor. It's very undignified.
I love that you're lying on the floor in front of some of the most powerful people.
Very disturbing David Rowe cartoon, the elephant in the room.
He really knows how to capture the look, doesn't he?
And just the sort of the clenching, there's movement in it.
I know.
You just don't want to think what the next frame looks like. Just keep smiling, Anthony.
No worries, Ursula.
Yeah. Who doesn't love a baby? Alex.
Is she a cute one like this?
A cute one. Alicia Payne, the member for Canberra, brought baby Joseph in.
Everyone looks so relaxed and smiling. I think more babies in Parliament. Like support dogs.
Alex, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week, and I'll let you do the honours.
Back to you, David.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mike. Time for some final observations just on the idea of a windfall gas tax. The crossbenchers, who are largely all in favour, will line up tomorrow to call for a Senate inquiry into a gas tax. These things can be a political stunt often, but they can also help build momentum and platform ideas around it. Greg.
Oh, well, I think it's just barking mad. You know, most of our policy discussion in this country lives in fantasy land. You know, we've got a tremendous shortage of gas. We've had ludicrous restrictions on being able to explore for gas. We're going to need gas for decades and decades and decades, probably forever. And so now we want to have an extra tax just to disincentivise it. It's just what you'd expect from the crossbenchers.
There you go. Phil.
Look, up until a few weeks ago, David, the Prime Minister was planning a trip to Gallipoli for Anzac Day. He was going to visit the subcontinent on the way through, I think Sri Lanka, and then do the dawn service at Anzac Cove. That is now off, as I understand, because of what's going on in the Middle East for both, you know, not a good area to fly in, but also, you know, events at home need to be attended to. And I think it gives you an indication about, you know, how long they expect this thing to be running.
Good point, Niki.
Apart from Andrew Hastie, Liberals seem to have trouble accepting that One Nation is actually out to destroy them. And if you look at what happened in South Australia, Liberal preferences elected One Nation MPs. Labor preferences actually elected Liberal MPs. And it looks like in Farrer, the Liberals will be helping One Nation again, so that the One Nation candidate there could very well win the seat on May 9. Go figure.
There you go. And we'll be watching that one very closely. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Terrific program. Finally, how does Angus Taylor plan to cut through to voters who have shifted from the Liberals to One Nation? John Howard says the answer is to put out detailed policies as soon as possible. But in politics, there's more than one way to grab some attention. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
He's a pretty cool dude.
Yeah, you gonna hop on?
All right. Is he going to attack me? Can I go outside? Yeah. Right, Charlie. He's responsive. Mate, he goes all right. Nothing wrong with Charlie. Has he been used as a stud? No.
He's been cut.
He's cut. Oh, he's cut.
He's cut.
Yeah. Didn't check.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.